Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this latest edition of our Commodity Pricing Network Livestream events. I'm Michael Brown, Head of Commodities at Barchart, and I'll be hosting and moderating this event today. I've been with Barchart for about 4 years and have over 20 years total in the commodities trading, solutions, and commodities data space. I'm joined today by Kellee James from Mercaris and Justin Bruch from Clear Frontier Ag Management. With that, I'm going to let Kellee and Justin say a few words of introduction and give a professional background on themselves. Kellee, let's start off with you.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Really good to be with you today, Michael and Justin. Thank you so much for inviting us to do this webinar. My name is Kellee James. I am the co-founder. I'm also the CEO of a company called Mercaris. And the short way to describe Mercaris is we are market information. We're a market data service, although we also run an online trading platform for organic and non-GMO commodities, and more broadly, identity preserved commodities. And so in our early days, that has meant organic and non-GMO grains and oil seeds. We've recently made a push into organic dairy, but in its fullest form, it can mean IP ag commodities of any sort. Think grass-fed, think country of origin, that sort of thing. My background, I did not grow up in an ag family, or that wasn't part of my story. I grew up in an Army family. I'm an Army brat, and moved all over the country, saw a fair bit of the world, but have always been attracted to agriculture. My parents, who both grew up in New York City, wondered where they got me, because the first thing I could do was I always seemed to find my way out to farms, rode horses for a little bit. And then just after grad school, got some work, doing work with coffee farmers in Honduras. And that was just the sort of gateway to me working what I think is a lifelong work in the ag sector with producers and others. And really interested in the intersections of ag with environment, with financial sustainability. It's one of those core sectors. If we don't get food and ag right, nothing else really matters. And so that type of sort of endless challenge has always appealed to me. I'll stop there and turn it over to Justin.
Kellee, thank you. It's always a pleasure to present with Kellee and Michael as well. Thanks for today and everybody. My name's Justin Bruch. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from Northwest Iowa. I grew up on a conventional farm that about 5 years ago we transitioned over to certified organic. I have an agronomy degree out of Iowa State. I spent 7 years farming in Ukraine, actively on a 100,000+ acre farm, and another 4 years in Canada. And I'm a co-founder in Clear Frontier, which is a farmland management company with a focus of buying farmland in the Corn Belt, renting it to farmers on a long-term basis, with the core focus that they'll transition it to certified organic and keep it certified organic. Today in the farmland market, and really in the institutional investing side of the farmland market, a lot of leases are structured short-term and with a cash component, which is challenging when you have to go through 36 months of transition to get to certified organic. And so we're trying to fill that void a bit. And Clear Frontier is based out of Omaha, Nebraska, where I have a team there that works with me. So let me pause there and flip that back to Mike.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Thank you both. To get started off here, I'm going to put out a couple of polls, and if the audience could address each of those, we would appreciate it. We'll kind of come back to those as we go through the presentation here. So I am going to go ahead and launch the first one, which is generally just a question to kind of get an idea around how many of you are currently sourcing organic and or non-GMO grain today. We've got that one out there, and then I'll just do the second one here at the same time. That one has to close first, so we'll let that one run. And while that poll is going, Kellee, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why and how you founded Mercaris.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Now, Michael, is there usually, I don't do a ton of slides on these, but I've got one or two that kind of help make the point. Are you able at the same time the poll is running to put up the first slide? There we go. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I was not. So thanks for putting that up.
No.
I did close the poll so we could see the slides.
sorry about that to anyone who didn't get a chance to answer. So really this graphic here is why I founded Mercaris. By the way, I should say I'm an economist by training. So I like to say, you know, economics is nothing more than decision science. It's science. It's about the choices, you know, we all make individually and then collectively at sort of a macro level. And I think one of the reasons I founded Mercaris is the evidence is right there in the grocery store every time you walk in. You know, 40 years ago, we walked into the grocery store and kind of picture yourself in any aisle. I'll pick the dairy aisle for this example. And your choices were, you know, milk or milk. Maybe you could choose whole milk or skim milk, but that was kind of it. And then as you start fast forwarding, you know, kind of coming through time, you know, today when you walk down the aisle, you've got a stunning range of choices. I mean, you can choose still the kind of plain, you know, whole milk or skim milk, but now you can choose organic milk, you can choose grass-fed milk, you can choose, you know, almond milk or pea protein milk. You know, it's stunning what you can do. And you can do this in any aisle. You can do this in the coffee aisle. You can do this anywhere you go in the grocery store. And so the consumer has largely spoken and said, we want different attributes from our food. And the market has answered, as it does, by providing those types of options. And the way I look at this as an economist is these are still commodity markets. You know, when I look at an organic milk, organic corn, organic soybeans, organic feed grade soybeans are still a commodity. It's still fungible. I can deliver one load or another, and as long as it meets the quality specs, it's indistinguishable. So it checks the box of what a commodity market is. It's just a differentiated kind of a niche type of commodity. So still obeys the laws of supply and demand for that particular category. And it's a growing area, and yet it's opaque. It's very hard to understand what's going on in the cash market, what supply is out there, demand is out there. You don't have the tools that you just have at your fingertips that you might even take for granted for those of us on the conventional side of things like a WASDE report, that sort of thing. And so for anyone who's kind of in the market tactically day-to-day making decisions, buy, sell type decisions, or plant, don't plant, plant this or that, there's a lack of information, and we seek to solve that. If you're sitting at the kind of corporate planning, more strategic type of role, you know, how do you keep an eye on this market and understand the opportunities or the opportunity costs, whether you're involved in the market, considering get involved, or have decided organic is not, you know, for you. You should still have a basic understanding of how this is evolving, because it does impact your customer, your supply chain, your broader stakeholders. So that's the why behind the organic. From a personal standpoint, I will say that I am very interested in how we use agriculture to solve some of our environmental problems. I worked in the Gulf for a while, working on with some of the fishermen down there, you know, looking at some of the fishing programs. And, you know, we have a problem with things like hypoxic zones and nitrification, and it's you know, agriculture is part of the problem. I think agriculture is also part of the solution. These types of production happily can help solve some multiple problems. And so just from a personal standpoint, we never tell people how to farm or how to run their business, but I think these types of systems are necessary to help solve some of the systemic challenges that we have from a environmental sustainability point of view. So I'll stop there.
Okay, and then Justin, you had a slide here too on organic food sales and how that contributes to this this whole organic and non-GMO market.
Yeah, thank you. I want to first say, Kelly, I second everything you just said on that. And this slide on organic food sales is part of why we're doing what we're doing at Clear Frontier, and that is 98+% of the U.S. is a conventional farmland system. I mean, you're looking at, as most people don't even know, roughly 90 million acres of corn and 90 million acres of beans, and that is the bulk of the farming system in the United States. But if you start looking at organic food sales and you start getting in the $50 billion range, you're no longer, it might be a niche or in its infancy, which I kind of think it is still in its early stages. But a $50 billion business is a large business, and it's very relevant. And I think the statistics there, as you look at them, of households across the country that actually look at organic and look at different type of food systems when they buy it in a grocery store, it is significant. as we look at that. And I also believe, as we deal with COVID and a pandemic, that people are probably more relevantly looking at what they're eating and where it's coming from, and that food source as well. And so I by no means am of the belief that our food system is unsafe. I do believe there are safer ways to produce food, as well as things that we can do that are better for the farm ground and for soil. So that's kind of my look at it when you look at U.S. organic food sales. And Kellee, I didn't know if you had any comments on this as well from your background.
No, I think this is a great slide. I mean, it's also an exciting area too, because whereas most food is kind of growing flat, kind of growing in line with population, these types of markets, organic food sales as the poster child, are showing pretty exciting growth. CAGR that's, reaches into the low double digits pretty consistently over the last, decade. So, yeah.
Okay, very good. I'm just going to jump back to our first poll here. So 66% of the audience voted, and it's almost a dead heat. 51% are not currently sourcing organic or non-GMO, and 49% are. So pretty much a dead heat there. Kellee, could you give us some indication of what is ahead for Mercaris in 2021 and beyond?
Sure. I'll tell you, so this is the part where I kind of pitch Mercaris, and I am, I'm a data nerd, an information hound. I think more information is better, not just data, but information and the ability to do something with it. So just, imagine for everybody that's logged in, thinking about your own situation and whether there are day-to-day decisions that need to be made or longer range planning type decisions, or, and what's the area that's your focus? Is it, procurement? Is it risk management? Those types of questions. So depending on what your own particular situation is, you might look at Mercaris in some slightly different ways. Overall, we track, some macroeconomic fundamentals. So understanding how the organic sector behaves differently than its conventional counterpart. On the supply side, we track things like acreage. This sounds like a very small thing, but prior to Mercaris, there was really not a good way of tracking acreage numbers and on a consistent basis. USDA did a good job, of giving us acreage numbers, but they were only given once every 5 years. They do the best. Getting a little bit of feedback. So we update acreage numbers twice a year for organic planting. And we look at yields, and so you're getting a picture of supply. The other part of supply that's important, and another key differentiator from organic on the grain side, is trade. So we are a net importer of certain organic grains like soybeans. We import almost 80% of our organic soybeans are coming from outside of the US, largely from India. But that's an important dynamic to understand if you're part of the supply chain. And we can talk a little bit about why that is and how Justin, for example, is helping to solve some of that dependence on foreign imports. So that's on the supply side. We also look at demand side, so tracking where does all this organic grain go to, who processes it, for what purpose. So another key differentiator between organic and conventional, especially if we're looking at corn, is that we don't have an ethanol. There's so far nobody's figured out, has said we need an organic ethanol. Maybe that's some entrepreneur out there is gonna propose that. But so that means organic, especially when it comes to corn, is even more dependent on feed grade usage than even conventional. So we look at herd size and consumption on the feed side quite closely to produce some estimates there, as well as food and residual use. Some of our tools are very practical. So like I said, we track prices. That's sort of our centerpiece. Is we run a survey. We also run our auctions platform and pull prices in from across the US and Canada and publish those prices in a variety of formats. So you can look at food grade versus feed grade prices. You can look at spot and forward prices. You can look at different regions of the country and really keep track of the cash market. You can understand where the organic farms are. There's a slew of reports that combined give you a very sophisticated, data-rich view of the sector. We also try to do some things that are pilots and kind of interesting. Justin helped us earlier, actually it was last year. we had a suspicion that farmland might be valued differently if it was organic versus conventional. I think we published a very short white paper. It didn't say this was not a tool to track farmland prices. It was just basically a guide to say, hey, take a look at this. This is an area to watch. The value of the asset itself is something that's that's interesting and has the potential to look a little different than its conventional neighbor. So we've done those types of one-off type of studies as well. But what you're looking at on the screen here is our repeatable regular reports that come out quite frequently.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Kellee. Justin, let's switch over to you for a minute. And could you give us some more background on Clear Frontier Ag and what services you provide and kind of where you see your business evolving here over the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So Clear Frontier's focus is I would say probably to disrupt the farmland industry a little bit, in that today the majority of farmland is owned by family farmers, and the majority of transactions, about 98.5%, are farmer to farmer with land trades. We look out over the next 15 years from an aging population, which the majority of farmers are older. The average age is about 59.5, pushing 60 of the U.S. farmer. As we look at that, we're going to see a lot of land trade hands in the next 10, 15 years. There are some large institutional farmland buyers out there that, and the traditional system, which is nothing wrong with it, is to buy those farms, rent them out on a short-term or 1-year cash lease basis, typically to the highest person that'll pay you the highest rent. Clear Frontier's vision is, let's go in and find the right farms that we deem right to farm differently from a conventional system, transition those to organic, and be in it for a long-term investment, and work with the tenants, try to help them improve their business. I want to see farms that we own improve our soil organic matter, which science will tell you is roughly 58% sequestered carbon. If you have a farm that's a 2.5% organic matter versus 4, your 4% soil organic matter farm is going to give you more free nitrogen and better water holding capacity. It also improves your fertility availability. So we want to go in and buy farmland, rent that to local farm operators. I'm very in tune to the idea of helping family farms, especially those that have younger generations that want to come back to the farm and continue to farm and expand, to be able to buy land that they maybe don't have the cash to be able to buy today, so they can rent it on a long-term basis, with the hopes that it will improve the productivity of those farms and leave that farm in a better quality or sustainable standpoint than it is for the next generation on. And so a lot of it for us is trying to find the right farm and the right farmers with the right attitude to want to expand, and then work with them. And we use Mercaris data to try to help look at the markets and the crop rotations of what they're going to be growing, and what's maybe the most economical crop mix as we look over 5, 6, 7 years, as well as maybe what's happening short term in the market, so we can maybe make adjustments to that cropping mix. Ultimately, try to provide a lot of value to the farmer, as well as try to provide the best return to them. So that's kind of our core strategy. We are focused on the Midwest and the Corn Belt. We're not focused on permanent crops, really East Coast, West Coast. I think there's a lot of opportunities on the organic, or what I classify really as the non-commodity space, in those markets. But for me, being a Midwest farmer and really spending my career on the conventional side, I'm really focused on making that shift in the Midwest, predominantly probably with a focus between Colorado, let's say, to Indiana, kind of across that Corn Belt section. So that's a bit more background on us. Today we own about 3,500 acres across Nebraska and Colorado. It is predominantly irrigated farm ground. And actually about half of it is certified organic, because we have bought some farms that were in transition, and one farm that is actually already certified organic. The rest is in T1 or T2. If you're not aware, it's a 36-month transition process with virtually no synthetics. So no commercially produced nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, no chemicals, no seed treatments, and no GMOs. And there's a stringent record-keeping process that you have to do. So you can be certified by a third-party independent certifier to show that you have followed all the way the process through. You store the grain separately. You sell that with a bill of lading, which is checked out as it goes out. And so there is a process to it. We talk a lot about today in the market about regenerative ag, which I think regenerative ag is great. There's a lot of definitions to what regenerative ag is. I'm not sure what the final definition is or where that'll land. But today, the market doesn't really pay a farmer to grow regenerative crops. The market does compensate you to pay to grow organic crops. And so that is really our current focus. And I'm not at all opposed to conventional farming. I did it at a very large scale for a number of years, and we honestly transitioned our farm because we were not making a lot of money raising $3.50 corn and $8 beans on $300 an acre cash rent ground. And so we did it for financial purposes. What I can tell you as an agronomist and as a farmer is after 4 and 5 years of going out and using manure for our fertility and changing the way we farm and using cover crops and a crop rotation, there is a difference in our soil structure, our soil organic matter, and really our soil biodiversity, and you start to see that in your crops. So it's a key and important benefit, and it honestly comes from changing a system of what is a lot of conventional farming, which is honestly corn and soybeans, or in a lot of our country today, it's corn, snow, corn, snow. Right now, this winter, we're not having a lot of snow, but you get the point. So let me pause.
Hey, Justin, I have a quick question. What's the profile or what's the demographic of the farmer that most often works with you? So have you noticed any common threads?
Yeah, and if you guys hear a little background noise, because I'm sitting in the Indianapolis airport, so I apologize for that. Our trend would be honestly more of a younger generation farmer. The guy that's 60 or 65 years old is probably not going to go out and change his system of farming and go through 3 years of transition and go back to probably a system of farming that happened more like 50 years ago. But you see the generation that's, for us, is probably more in that 20 to 50, and honestly more of the guys that are in their 30s to 40s that are looking to do it differently and honestly change their farming practice. I also see it with guys that have that generation that's in grade school, high school, or maybe college, where they want to come back to the farm, and honestly the farm economics have not been good really since 13, 14, and so that's a bit of the change as well.
Interesting.
Okay, excellent. Kellee, anything else on that point?
No, I think it's interesting to hear who's interested in doing this. Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, excellent. So just a short break. I'm going to go ahead and issue the second poll question. We'll get that out. And while that is running, I just want to also mention that we do have a question Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your webinar dashboard. And please use that to submit any questions that you like to the panel. And at the end of the discussion, we'll get to as many of those as we can. And so we'll give the poll just a few more minutes yet. We got about 50% of the folks have voted. And we'll just kind of let that continue ramping up. Okay, and just while that's wrapping up, Kellee, let's talk a little bit more about organic and non-GMO grains. Relatively speaking, the organics are still a small portion of the overall market, but yet a very important segment. Can you tell us a little bit about the current size of the market and the growth rate relative to legacy grains? And
Sure.
What are some of the big drivers today and going into the rest of this year or next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different enough to be interesting. Maybe if grains are horses, then organics can be a bit of a zebra. You know, looks familiar, but with stripes, maybe a little different habitat. So I don't. This is actually Justin's slide, so I will not steal his thunder here, but I will say I'm going to run through some very quickly some of the things that make it different. I mean, starting at the farm, Justin already mentioned there's that 3-year transition period. The organic tends to it tends to be stickier. You know, it just can't respond to market forces as fast because you can't ramp up production. Certainly, you can take acres out of production, but you know, you got to think if you take an acre out of production, it's going to take you 3 years to get it back. And same with, you know, animals. It takes a while to build up your herd size. So it tends to be a little bit stickier, combined with the fact that these are smaller, thinner markets that can make it, you know, volatile. You know, farmers. The other thing that to keep in mind is when you see a price you like for, let's say, corn or soybeans, it doesn't necessarily mean you can just respond and plant those soybeans. You may have a rotation that you're following because you're trying to condition your soil and add nitrogen or something else that means that you have to make some decisions about your rotation. There's no such thing in organic as corn on corn. You just can't do it. So that changes the economic fundamentals. Once you get the crop out of the field, you got to figure out where to take it, and you can't just go to your county elevator 20 miles up the road, or you may not be able to because the entire supply chain is certified organic, not just the farm. So you've got to find a place that can clean, store, process your grain, and kind of balance that with your freight concerns. We've got a map that looks down on the U.S. and Canada, and you can see the facilities that'll, you know, take your organic wheat or will crush your organic soybeans. So that's a consideration. I mentioned the kind of foreign competition part of the equation. So depending on where you're located, you know, we've got some major ports in Baltimore and elsewhere where you're competing with farmers in let's say India or Argentina, and so that's a part of the dynamic as well. And then last but not least, I shouldn't say last, but one of the things to consider is you don't have the same type of risk management tools. Now, a lot of the Mercaris data is making those tools available. So insurance products that are tailored to organic, even the ability to hedge price risk, those are things that if you have a good solid set of cash data, you can start to do. But all of those are considerations, and they change how, and I mentioned about, you know, the feed versus food versus industrial energy use dynamic as well. So it all goes into the equation. It's just more difficult. Like everything else in life, if the path is not laid out for you, you have to do some extra planning and thinking before you can get into the supply chain, whether you're on the demand or the supply side. And so as a result, we haven't seen the penetration. Something like organic wheat has probably some of the largest penetration. We're talking about getting close to 2% of all planted acreage is now wheat. But for something like corn and soybeans, it's still well under, you know, 1% of all planted acreage. Hay crop is a little different. We do grow a lot of organic forages. That's actually by acreage. That's actually one of our largest crops that you see out there. But I've got a couple of slides to talk about the differences, to talk about price until further on, and in favor of talking about the supply-demand dynamic.
Okay, good. Justin, did you want to add a bit to that? Yeah, since it's your
slide.
slide.
I'm just going to make a few comments here. You look at organic demand and you look at organic supply, and the reason we boxed this out is you look back in 2008 when we went through the financial crisis, and you continue to see a 20+% growth, which tells you even that in a time of financial concern, consumers still go to the market and we're looking at what they were looking for a healthier or a different choice. And I think another comment is you look at the organic soybeans that we're importing 80+% of. I honestly find it appalling that in the United States, in this country, the way we grow corn and soybeans, that we're importing 80% of the soybeans. A soybean is $20 a bushel when we've been trading $1 soybeans, and yet we're still importing 80%. That's a huge market opportunity, and yes, it is not easy. It's not the easy button of spray it, go out and plant a GMO soybean, spray it, and come back and combine it. It is different and it is challenging, but it's also economically advantageous, and it's a market that is continuing to grow as far as demand goes. And so I think there's a lot of challenges, and it's not necessarily easy to do, but I think there's a really bright upside. And I think as you look at it from grain buyers and offtake side, the market it's in its very early stage and real reality of where it is today and where it's got to go as you look at demand. So I would really like to see that continue to build out, because I do think there's huge potential up and down that supply line.
Okay, excellent. We're just going to flip back to the poll for just a minute. So the question was asked, who do you think the largest retailer of organically sourced food is in the U.S.? 28% said Whole Foods, 25% said Costco, 40% Walmart, and 3% Safeway, 5% Trader Joe's. It was 77% of the audience that voted, so I think we have a pretty good sampling. Kellee, can you comment on that?
Yeah, it's Walmart. Costco's kind of nipping at its heels, but that's, this just goes to the point of, organic is not this sort of counterculture, weird hippie thing. When Walmart enters a category, it's big. And, even Whole Foods, which sometimes I think takes a lot of the headline space in the news, is kind of runs under, we'll see with Amazon now as their new owners, but yeah, it's Walmart. It's folks, everyday folks are looking for value. And here's the other thing about organic. I think earlier on it had more of a reputation. It still does as sort of a budget buster, but I think a couple of interesting things. One that have happened recently. One is, I'll talk about the elephant in the room, COVID. When COVID hit last February, it drove everybody back to the grocery stores. And that is traditionally where we have consumed organic. If you think about it, you don't usually get organic at school or at most restaurants, especially not, your larger chain restaurants, maybe a few farm to table type restaurants. You buy it in the grocery store and then you take it home and cook it and eat it. And so I think the numbers that Justin showed before on sales, when we get the 2020 numbers in, are going to be much higher than the earlier predictions, because we know from talking to our stakeholders that there's been a bump in consumer in sales. How much of a bump is a little bit to be determined. So part of the, COVID is still going on, and how much do our habits change after we have widespread vaccination and the rates come down? I think some of that will stick, not all of it. I can't wait to go back out to some of my favorite restaurants. I hope they survive. But I do think that this kind of accelerates the trend rather than just provides a blip. The other thing is organic is no longer, I think, in many categories, the difference between organic and conventional has come down price-wise. This is not on the farm side and what farmers are paying, but if you look at the premiums, what's happened is the supply chain does what supply chains do. It's gotten better and more efficient. And so you can still find the price differential on the shelves, but a lot of that is not attributable to the farm price. I mean, it still holds true that, very little of that, farmers still make more money per bushel, per acre on organic production. But a lot of what we see in the grocery store is packaging and marketing and that sort of thing. And a lot of those costs have been squeezed down. And so you see the price differential between organic and conventional has gotten smaller. And that too has fostered more widespread adoption. So I think that, COVID is going to cause a shift, and it's already, you can already see how much it's starting to impact the demand for organic.
Okay, excellent. Switching gears just a little bit, the Mercaris data is now available through bar charts, commodity view, and our APIs. And Kellee, I know your team is currently using this tool to analyze the market against the legacy grain markets. Can you talk to us a little bit about some examples of what your team is doing and how our mutual customers might want to use a combination of Mercaris data and commodity view?
Yeah, we were so pleased with this partnership, because one of my own thesis here is that this should integrate with your day-to-day workflow. And who better than bar chart to make that a reality? So if you're looking at the charts and data and information that you get through bar chart, it's fairly easy to just kind of turn on the functionality that lets you then track organic prices against conventional. I mean, separately if you like, but you can also track them against conventional. I think here's a view, a kind of one of those views. You can do all sorts of things with the data, but just to bring up one particular screenshot, you can look at the take corn belt prices for conventional. I'm sorry, Iowa prices for conventional corn. These are cash prices, and if you can plot them against. We do a kind of a corn belt, so we do a couple state region. First of all, you can see the difference in prices here. I think that's interesting to see. Even though you've seen corn prices come up in recent weeks, and organic prices actually have been on a bit of a downward trend. If you look over the past year or so, there's still a pretty significant delta between the two. The other thing is you notice the volatility. And if you were to zoom in on any particular area, you can see sometimes the markets, while they are correlated, it is somewhat of a weak correlation. It's I think a bit of a myth to say, hey, organic is always 2x conventional. We know that that's not the case. And this is a view that's a little bit kind of compressed. If you just look back to April of this year, you can see areas that I boxed in red where the organic price actually dipped down and the conventional price rose at the same time, or vice versa. The best, I think the most, one of the examples, I had a farmer come up to me, this was a couple of years ago, and say, yeah, I've got some USD, I've got some crop insurance, and I think this was on soybeans, and he said, I actually got a payout this year because the USDA revenue protection price was based on Chicago prices. And at the end of that year, conventional soybean prices had declined, and yet organic prices had continued, soybean prices had continued to rise. So he was the beneficiary of a market that was not correlated to, that is not correlated to conventional, and he got a check. And he was pretty happy about that. I said to him, it can go the other way. Just because it worked out for you this year doesn't mean it won't another year. And I know when we talk to the ag banks and insurance companies, and they're very aware of this dynamic and what it does to your balance sheet, or what it does to your risk when that happens. But this is the type of information you can be aware of when you've got the ability to overlay data sets like this, or just track them more easily, and instead of having to make a special effort. They're just there at your fingertips when you need them.
Okay, excellent. And Justin, could you give us a little background on how you're currently using the Mercaris data to enhance the services that you provide to your clients?
Yeah, for sure, Michael. Thanks, Kelly. It's interesting to look at the organic markets, because as a conventional farmer, you can look at CBOT and you can look at the trends and the information, and it's pretty easy to go through and access that and see what's going on, as well as to hedge things. Organic is a little more challenging today, because I think at the stage where we're at with the market. So what we try to do is we look at the data and we try to use that to try to help with our forecasting as far as rotations, because I don't want to go through and change a rotation short term for not necessarily a short term gain, because you don't grow corn on corn, let's say, in an organic system traditionally. So we're trying to use it to basically look at that long-term picture, is how we look at farmer income, and ultimately we provide a lot of transparency to the farmers that are tenants for us, because I want to be able to show them what we're looking at their cost of production and their estimated yield of how those numbers look, and so having a clear picture of what the market trends look like and where they're going is very, very helpful for us. And so that's where Mercaris stands out, because they're the leaders in the field, and they're pioneering this process, and thank God they are, because there's no one else out there that can provide that type of information. So it's very valuable for us as we try to look long term, because I'm not looking at it as a next year return. I'm looking at it over the next 3, 5, 7, and honestly 10 years out. And to do that today, it's challenging in any commodity market, but trying to have as much information as possible as you look at those rotations, and then how they fit into your organic certification, as well as what you're trying to do from a soil build out and a sustainability standpoint. there's a lot of metrics that go into place there. Where as a conventional farmer, I may make the decision is in February, for example, to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to plant more beans or I'm going to plant more corn, just looking at prices and what I can lock in on that futures contract. Some of which you can do in organic, but it's harder because it's not as easy to go out and just make a switch on your rotation. Say, I'm going to put this back into corn this year, and I'll put a corn on there that I'm comfortable with that variety on corn, for example. It's not quite the same system, so there's a different management piece to it, and having as much data as possible is crucial when you're doing it.
I feel like Justin and his brethren and sister are playing three-dimensional chess, and if we can help him in any way to be successful, then that's mission accomplished for us.
Three-dimensional chess is probably a good way to put it. It's there's a lot of strategy and a lot of long-term thinking you have to look at as you look at this and go through it. And ultimately, as we said earlier, it is not easy, but a lot of times the best opportunities are not easy. Sometimes you have to forge that path, and there's not a lot of what I would classify as true experts in organic, because there's a lot of us out there that are 3 years or 5 years into the process. There's a lot of people in conventional farming that have been farming for the last 50 years. That's a lot different when you start looking at how you manage weed control and crop rotation on different soils, as well as the marketing piece on the organic side. So three-dimensional chess sometimes with one eye closed and your arm behind your back is probably closer.
All right, very good. Great discussion, everyone. There are a couple of questions from the audience, and we've got time to address a few of those, and then we'll wrap it up. One of the questions was, are there financing benefits from the banking industry if you're buying land to grow organics?
No, not necessarily. Honestly, most of your local banks in the Midwest will look at your 3-year transition process and not be very happy about it or very excited on that basis, because you're going to go out and grow a crop organically and you're going to sell it for conventional prices in transition for the most part. We might be growing non-GMO soybeans to pick up a premium there, for example, if we get a market on corn, but ultimately you're going to go out and do the work in the process to grow an organic crop, sell it conventionally until you hit that certification point. And if you go out and look at your numbers, and you're honestly not going to grow typically, especially in those transition years, probably not going to grow as big a crop because you just don't have as many tools in your toolbox for fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, or your ability, let's say, to go out on a corn crop and top dress nitrogen. Consequently, your economics are not going to look as good, and most of the banks are honestly not overly excited about bridging that gap. You see Rabo is a good example. They're doing some lending almost more like permanent crop basis, where they're stretching that out to help you get through the transition period. So there are some changes in that, but financing to make that transition and get through it, honestly, it's a barrier to entry for a lot of people.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of interesting innovations here. Rabobank is a great example of having a specific transitional lending program. When you're talking about buying farmland, though, that's interesting. Farm Op Capital is another one that comes to mind, where they're lending. Here's an interesting model. Rather than lending based on the underlying asset, like if you're going to buy the farmland, they're looking at your offtake. Like when you get the crop off the field, what's the value of your kind of your cash flow after you've made harvest. And so that's, I think, a different model than most banks, where your operating loans each year kind of are backed with the farmland itself. They're looking at the increased potential for cash flow. That's different from if you're just trying to acquire a piece of farmland for the first time. Maybe that's, I don't know of any programs that are specifically targeted to organic. I know here you've got maybe outsized influence of investor funds. So, think about Justin's model or Iroquois Valley. There's several different funds that are making capital available to young farm, well, you don't have to be a young farmer, but farmers that are looking to acquire organic farmland that is already organic or that they're transitioning into organic. So those resources are out there, but like everything in organic, you just have to do a little more research and digging to find them.
Okay, excellent. Another question came in from the audience. What is the main benefit in adding transparency to the organics industry?
Yeah, I will take a crack at this because I will tell everyone candidly, when we started Mercaris, one of the things that that we run into is people say, oh, I don't know if I want more transparency. Like if there are people that make money on markets being opaque. There are also people that are worried that, is the organic premium going to go away? This is what we say to that. A couple things. One is, this is my standard line is we are well into the information age, and you can no longer compete just on knowing things that other people don't know. So there's got to be something else in your business model and your practices that give you the edge and allow you to serve the customer that are just, I know things that no one else knows. So don't be afraid of that. It's just the reality that we're all working in. The second thing is I think there's a fear, particularly amongst growers, but not only growers, that, are these prices going to come down? If you're calling these commodity markets, am I just going to be in the same trap that I was before where I'm trying to make it up on yield because I just, the per bushel price is so low? Which it's not really the fault of information. I mean, it's the fault of economics, if you will. And so we say, umbrellas don't cause rain. Just because you see a lot of umbrellas and it's raining, it doesn't mean the umbrellas are the cause of the rain. And having more transparency is not causing markets to be more volatile or for, prices to rise or fall. But I think it's another valid question there is how do you make a living on the organic supply chain, whether you're a farmer, whether you're, processing grains, whether you're an entrepreneur that's got a food brand, and continue to make a living off of what you're producing. And I think part of the answer lies in what organic is in itself. I mean, you as a producer or you as part of the supply chain are being paid for those practices that are admittedly more difficult or require more thought or more planning, sometimes require more cost, but not always. And so the cost it's just that your cost of production can be different. You're doing something that other people aren't doing. That continues to be right now the exception rather than the rule. Therefore, there's a premium to that. If one day everything is organic, it will be then indistinguishable from the larger market, and you'll have to figure out something else that makes you a differentiator if you want to command a premium to the norm. I think that's a long way away, but one day, sure.
Very good. Justin, anything to add on that point?
No, I mean, I'm of the view that I'm of the same view as Kelly, and I think transparency. I think transparency is good because there's a market premium there, honestly, because I'm not going to grow as good a yield if I go out and grow corn and beans or wheat in organic, and I might over time, but in the early stage especially, you just don't have all of the genetic benefits and the tools to get there. So you're going to probably grow a little less yield. It's at a higher price, and ultimately, a lot of farmers want to grow the biggest crop possible, and it's awesome to talk at the coffee shop or the local pub about how big your yields were. I think a lot more people today would rather make more money at the end of the day and feel like they're also improving their farm and doing something a little bit different. So I think transparency is a crucial piece to that. And I don't want to get off on this side, but I think today I believe the transparency of what the organic producer produces in the U.S. is very good because we have independent, very good certifiers. I oftentimes question some of that transparency and stuff that comes in from abroad because after spending a very long time abroad, I know how some of the systems work abroad, and they are not the same as they are here. So I honestly think transparency is good from my perspective because most of the organic farmers, and I mean almost all of them in the U.S., are playing by the rules and following the process and doing it right. And so there's a lot less to hide from that perspective. So I'll pause there.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. And we're approaching the end of our time here. So I have just one more question for you both. And that is, what other emerging ag markets do you have your eyes on? Where do you see things going, and what are you going to tackle next?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have our eye on regenerative ag, but we're not ready to cover it because, as Justin mentioned, right now regenerative doesn't have a standardized set of practices that we can just, easily report on. But certainly bears watching, and I think, organic itself covers a lot of the, the processes that regenerative is trying to get at. I mentioned at the beginning that identity preserved largely is our wheelhouse, and so. It's things like country of origin coffee. It's grass-fed is another one. Grass-fed, interestingly enough, also does not have a national standard. Grass-fed right now is defined kind of loosely, but certainly in terms of consumer demand, the consumer wants it. So we're not in the business of creating standards. We're in the business of reporting on market conditions once the standards are there. But I think grass-fed is one of those that is ready to take off. So.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Justin?
my three comments would be regenerative, a very hot topic in the space, and I think at some point there will be a development more into the standards. If you watch the documentary Kiss the Ground and how they talk about the process, there's some interesting things that when you look at with regenerative and bringing livestock into the rotation. On that side, I think another interesting market, it's not necessarily commodity, but it kind of is the carbon market. I think is we continue to hear a lot about it. It's a very hot topic in the industry. I think as well with the administration change happening, you're going to see more on that carbon piece, how you evaluate it, and a value to it. And there's a lot of development. I think there's a long ways to go on that side. And then I think the last thing is really that identity preservation piece of being able to follow grain from the field it was grown on all the way honestly to the consumer. And that almost goes in a perfect world, if you want to take that one step further, and I think it takes time, is Farmer Joe in Iowa is growing corn, beans, and wheat, for example, and it's going to this CPG, it's processing it into a granola bar, and you can basically trace that all the way back, kind of like a blockchain system, or maybe on what you see a little bit on beef in West Europe. So I think that's another piece that takes us a step further on grain. I think there's challenges to that when you're moving big volumes of grain through the current infrastructure system. But I think those are all three areas, if you look at over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, we're going to talk a lot about as we go forward.
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you both very much for joining our panel today, and thank you to our audience for participating. Appreciate everyone's input on the 2 poll questions that we asked. I think that was very helpful. The Mercaris data is fully available now on bar charts, tools, and services. So if you're a current subscriber on Commodity View and you'd like to have a look at the Mercaris data, compare and contrast the organics data with bar charts conventional data from 4,000 localized grain elevators, that's open for you to do. Just reach out to myself, mbrown@barchart.com, commodity@barchart.com, CMDTY, or just head out to our website at barchart.com/commodity. Again, thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mike. Cheers. Bye.